In the 1870s, somewhere along the Kansas-Missouri border, entire families started disappearing from their homesteads. No bodies, no witnesses, just empty cabins with food still on the table and wagons abandoned on dusty trails. When AUS Marshal finally tracked the pattern, what he found wasn't a gang of outlaws, it was something far worse. A family, and they had been killing together for years. This is the story of the most terrifying serial killers the Old West ever produced. A family whose real names were never recorded. A family who turned hospitality into a death sentence. And a family who, to this day, has never been caught. The years following the Civil War were among the most violent in American history. The frontier wasn't just lawless, it was a graveyard. Thousands of people were moving west, chasing land, gold, and new beginnings. But the infrastructure to protect them didn't exist. Sheriffs were scarce. Federal marshals covered territories the size of entire states. And if you disappeared on a lonely trail between settlements, chances are no one would ever look for you. This wasn't the romanticized West of movies and dime novels. This was a place where survival meant keeping your head down, where asking too many questions could get you killed, and where entire communities learned to live with whispered rumors they were too afraid to investigate. Around 1872, those whispers started spreading through trading posts, saloons, and Sunday church gatherings across the Kansas-Missouri border region. Homesteaders who'd stopped at a particular farmhouse for water or shelter were never seen again. Travelers who asked for directions near a certain creek simply vanished into thin air. Merchants who took a shortcut through a specific valley disappeared with their goods, their horses, and their lives. At first, people blamed the usual suspects: bandits, Confederate deserters still bitter from the war, native raiding parties, or simple accidents on dangerous terrain. After all, the frontier killed people every day. Snake bites, disease, falls from horses, drownings in flash floods. Death was so common that a few missing travelers didn't raise immediate alarm. But the pattern was too consistent, too deliberate, and too close to one isolated property that no lawman had ever bothered to visit. The family, never officially named in any surviving record, lived on the out edge of civilization, where Kansas met Missouri in a landscape of rolling prairie, scattered timber, and creeks that flooded every spring. Their property sat along a commonly used trail that connected the small settlements about 20 miles apart. It was the kind of place travelers would naturally stop a halfway point, a place to water horses, fix a broken wheel, or rest for the night before continuing the journey. The family itself seemed unremarkable: a father in his 50s, withered and quiet, a mother who appeared devout, often seen reading scripture on the porch, to grown sons in their 20s, both strong and capable, and a teenage daughter, maybe 16 or 17, with a sweet smile and a helpful demeanor. To the few locals who'd met them, they seemed like typical frontier settlers: hard-working, religious, self-sufficient. But they were none of those things. By 1874, the disappearances couldn't be ignored anymore. A circuit judge traveling to hear cases in a nearby county went missing along that same stretch of road. Then a wealthy merchant from Kansas City vanished while transporting a shipment of gold and silver. Then an entire family of settlers' parents and 3 children under the age of 10 disappeared without a trace. Their wagon was found overturned near the creek, but there were no bodies. No blood. No signs of struggle. Just gone. Local sheriffs started asking questions, but the investigation went nowhere. The frontier was too vast, records were too incomplete, and most lawmen were overwhelmed just trying to stop bar fights and cattle theft. Missing persons cases, those were low priority. People disappeared all the time, but witnesses started coming forward, always in hushed tones, always afraid to speak too loudly. A circuit preacher claimed he'd ridden past the farmhouse one evening and seen fresh graves behind the barn, at least 6 mounds of disturbed earth that hadn't been there a month earlier. When questioned, the family said they'd been burying livestock lost to disease. The preacher didn't push further. A drifter swore he decamped in the hills above the property one night and heard screaming coming from the cellar around midnight. He rode into town the next morning to report it, but by the time anyone investigated, there was nothing. No screams, no evidence, just the family, calm and cooperative, inviting the lawmen inside to search. They found nothing suspicious. A general store owner in the nearest town noticed something strange. The family rarely bought supplies, but whenever they did, they paid with an unusual variety of currency: gold coins from California, Union Army script, Confederate bills, Mexican silver. When asked where it came from, the father said they'd been saving for years and occasionally found old money left behind by previous landowners, plausible, but unsettling. And then there was the girl. Multiple travelers reported that she was often the one who flagged them down, asking if they needed help or offering fresh water from the well. She was polite, soft-spoken, and completely disarming. Who would suspect a teenage girl on the frontier of being dangerous? She was the perfect lure. What no one realized, what no one could have imagined, was that this was a family hiding a killer among them. This was a family of killers, every single member. And they had turned murder into a system, a routine, a way of life. They had a method. The girl would flag down travelers, especially families or lone men who looked prosperous. The mother would offer food and rest. The father would assess their belongings, their money, their weapons. And if the victims were deemed valuable enough, the sons would move in for the kill, sometimes with rifles, sometimes with blunt objects, sometimes with ropes and knives. The bodies were dragged to the cellar, stripped of valuables, and buried after dark. It was efficient, it was calculated, and it had been happening for years. In the spring of 1875, everything changed. A U.S. Marshal named Samuel Garrett rode into the area, tracking a missing federal witness who was supposed to testify in a high-profile corruption case. The witness had last been seen traveling west along the Kansas-Missouri border. Garrett was methodical, patient, and didn't trust coincidences. He started pulling records, interviewing locals, mapping out every disappearance reported in the past 3 years. And every single case led back to the same stretch of road, the same property, the same family. But Garrett had seen false accusations before. Frontier justice was often mob justice, and innocent people had been hanged on rumors alone. He needed proof, so he didn't ask for permission. He didn't announce himself. He rode into the hills above the farmhouse, set up camp in a dense grove of cottonwood trees, and watched. For 2 days, nothing happened. The family went about their routine, tending animals, working the garden, sitting on the porch in the evenings. They looked like any other frontier family trying to survive. And then, on the 3rd day, a wagon appeared on the trail. If you love dark, real stories from the Old West, consider subscribing and leaving a like. It helps a lot. And now, back to the case. It was a young couple, newly married, heading west to claim land under the Homestead Act. They had everything they owned packed into that wagon: tools, furniture, savings, hope. When they reached the farmhouse, the girl came out and waved them down. She smiled. She offered water. The mother appeared on the porch, welcoming and kind. Garrett watched through his spyglass as the couple climbed down from the wagon, grateful for the hospitality. The father emerged from the barn, shook the husband's hand, and invited them inside to rest. The wife carried a basket of food toward the house, and then the sons appeared. They came from behind the barn, rifles already raised. The husband saw them first and tried to reach for his own weapon, but he was too slow. The first shot hit him in the chest. He collapsed. The wife screamed and tried to run, but the girl, the sweet, helpful girl, grabbed her arm and dragged her toward the cellar door. The mother held the door open. The second son fired. The wife fell silent. Garrett couldn't believe what he was seeing. He'd expected to find evidence, maybe a shallow grave, maybe stolen property. But this, a family working together, in broad daylight, executing travelers like it was just another chore. He didn't wait. He rode hard for the nearest town, 20 miles south, and returned 3 days later with a posse of 12 armed men, a county sheriff, and a federal deputy. They expected a fight. They expected resistance. But when they arrived at the farmhouse, it was empty. The family had vanished, no horses in the barn, no supplies in the house, no clothing, no weapons, no personal belongings. It was as if they'd known someone was watching and had fled in the middle of the night. But what they left behind told the whole story. The cellar door was padlocked, but the posse broke it open with axes. The smell hit them first: rot, decay, death. Inside, they found 12 bodies in various stages of decomposition. Some were recent, maybe days old. Others had been there for months, possibly years. Men, women, children. All of them showed signs of violent death: gunshot wounds, blunt force trauma, stab wounds. Behind the barn, they found more graves. 9 shallow burial sites, some marked only by disturbed earth and rocks. The remains were exhumed. Personal items were catalogued: wedding rings, pocket watches, travel documents, children's toys. Every grave told the story of someone who'd made the mistake of trusting the wrong people. Inside the house, investigators found something even more chilling. Crates filled with stolen belongings: jewelry, money, weapons, clothes, tools, Bibles with family names inscribed inside. It wasn't just theft, it was a trophy collection. The family had kept mementos from nearly every victim, organized and stored like inventory in a general store. One investigator found a ledger in the kitchen. It wasn't detailed, but it contained dates, initials, and amounts of money. The entries went back to at least 1871, possibly earlier. If the ledger was accurate, the family had killed at least 30 people over 4 years, maybe more. The posse searched the surrounding area for days. They found abandoned campsites, discarded personal items, and evidence that the family had fled west, possibly toward Colorado, the New Mexico territory. A massive manhunt was launched. Wanted posters were printed and distributed across 5 states and 3 territories. Rewards were offered: $500 per family member, dead or alive. But the family was never found. Local newspapers ran stories for months. The case became a regional scandal. How had this happened? How had an entire family of killers operated for years without anyone stopping them? The answer was uncomfortable, but simple. The frontier was too big, too chaotic, and too violent for anyone to notice one more pocket of evil. Theories spread. Some believed the family split up and disappeared into different territories, changing their names and starting over in new isolated homesteads. Others thought they were killed by another criminal gang who didn't want competition. A few locals claimed they'd been seen in Denver, in Santa Fe, in small towns along the California Trail, but none of the sightings were ever confirmed. One particularly chilling theory suggested that the family hadn't stopped killing, that they'd simply moved somewhere even more remote, where law enforcement was even weaker, and continued their work. After all, they'd gotten away with it before. Why would they stop? To this day, no one knows their real names. No photographs exist. No family records were ever located. No descendants have come forward. They're remembered only as the family on the Kansas line, the nameless killers, or simply the murder family, and the 21 confirmed victims they left behind. But here's what makes this case truly haunting. This wasn't the work of one deranged outlaw or a gang of ruthless criminals. This was a family that chose murder as a way of life. A father who led, a mother who participated, sons who executed, a daughter who lured. They weren't driven by desperation or revenge or madness. They killed for profit, for convenience, for sport, and they did it together. In a land where law was a suggestion and violence was currency, they thrived. And the most terrifying part, they were never punished, they simply disappeared. Just like their victims, the Old West wasn't just dangerous because of lone gunslingers or ruthless outlaw gangs. It was dangerous because evil didn't always wear a black hat or carry a six-shooter. Sometimes it wore a smile, sometimes it offered you water on a hot day, and sometimes it was waiting for you at the dinner table. The case was never officially closed. The victims were buried in unmarked graves. The family became a ghost story, a legend whispered around campfires and written about in regional history books. But somewhere out there, maybe in an old cemetery with no name, or maybe still alive in the bloodline of people who have no idea what their ancestors did, the family on the Kansas line still exists. And that might be the most disturbing thought of all. If you want more true stories from the darkest corners of the Old West, make sure to subscribe and leave a like. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from, city and country? And don't go anywhere, there's another Old West nightmare waiting for you in the next video.